2026 regulations are already looking a little artificial and questionable at times, but the Australian Grand Prix was surprisingly decent, even if the favorite comfortably won the race. There was a multi-lap fight for the lead, plenty of overtakes throughout the field, and that's on a track that exposes the weaknesses of these new regulations. So after the first race of the season, what have we actually learned about the competitive order in 2026? And more importantly, is George Russell already destined to win the championship? There are four key takeaways that I really took away from this opening weekend of the 2026 season. The first is that Mercedes are definitely ahead, but Ferrari are still not that far behind. Very quickly into the weekend, Mercedes showed that their preseason pace was no joke. Their long runs in FP2 were already foreshadowing what the race would eventually become, even though Ferrari did end up topping the timing sheets in practice. As many people expected, including George Russell himself, Ferrari still appears to have the advantage off the line. Leclerc used that strength perfectly to grab the lead at the first corner. Russell quickly surged back past him, but it didn't end there. We saw the two drivers trading momentum at the front for several laps before Leclerc eventually held Russell off for a period of time. That was slightly surprising because Mercedes did look like they had the outright fastest car throughout the weekend, but Ferrari were surprisingly still there or thereabouts. Once the VSC did split the Mercedes and Ferraris on track though, Mercedes were able to stretch their legs and show that they do in fact have the fastest package at the moment. But Ferrari are not too far behind, which is good news for Formula One. When you factor in Ferrari's excellent starts, how difficult it is to pass under these regulations, and more particularly stay ahead after you do pass, and the fact that strategy hurt Ferrari more than outright pace, there are some encouraging signs for Ferrari fans. Hamilton's speed and presence have looked noticeably different since the start of this new rule cycle. After losing out to Russell during their final years at Mercedes and enduring the most difficult season of his career in 2025 after moving to Ferrari, this regulation reset always felt like Hamilton's last real opportunity to show he still has it. And so far, he looks much more comfortable in the car. He was still about a tenth and a half off Leclerc in qualifying, although it wasn't the cleanest session from him, and there were still a few communication issues with his new race engineer. But compared to where he was last season, this is a far stronger starting point. We even saw flashes of the old Lewis Hamilton towards the end of the race. It looked like he may have managed his tires better than Leclerc, and with another lap or two, he might have challenged for his first real podium with Ferrari. It's still not quite the level that Hamilton wants or needs, but it is an encouraging start. One thing that stood out immediately is that the grid has already separated into clear groups. Right now, there actually appear to be three distinct groups in Formula One. The front runners, a second group just behind them, and then the rest of the field. From what we saw in Australia, Mercedes and Ferrari are clearly leading the pack. Behind them, somewhat surprisingly, sit McLaren and Red Bull, with Red Bull probably being slightly ahead. Lando Norris never really looked comfortable all race or all weekend long, and he wound up 51 seconds behind George Russell at the end, and only 3 seconds ahead of Max Verstappen, who started all the way down in P20. If Verstappen hadn't crashed earlier in the weekend, he probably would have been much closer, but still some distance off the leaders. And then comes the rest of the grid. Every other team finished a lap down, and whenever the top four encountered them, the overtakes were relatively straightforward. Well, except for a cheeky Arvid Lindblad, who clearly wasn't interested in making life easy for Max Verstappen. Arvid Lindblad had a super impressive opening weekend of his Formula One career. Large gaps like this aren't unusual at the beginning of a new rules era, but they are a little disheartening after how close it was in 2025. That said, there's still a good chance that these gaps close fairly quickly as teams, especially customer teams like McLaren, get a better handle on the new power units. The race did technically have about 3 times as many overtakes as the 2025 Australian Grand Prix, but that statistic doesn't tell the full story. Many of these overtakes felt somewhat artificial. Yes, DRS was artificial as well, and yes, it relied on a button just like what we have right now with the energy deployment, but even with DRS, the driver still had to do some work a lot of the times. Sometimes it might have been braking later, forcing a mistake, or using tire offsets to complete the move. With the new energy deployment system, a lot of the overtakes looked more like a yo-yo effect. One driver would deploy energy and pass, and then a turn or two later, the other driver would do the same. It was entertaining in the moment, but it raises a question about the long-term racing product. Right now, teams are still experimenting with how to deploy their energy effectively, which makes things unpredictable and interesting in the short term. But eventually teams will optimize those systems and the strategies will likely become very similar across the grid. If that happens, the question becomes, where will the overtakes actually come from? So after all that, where does George Russell stand in the championship picture? There are still plenty of unknowns. It's only the first race of the season, and Ferrari do look genuinely competitive. But Russell has absolutely cemented himself as the early favorite. That status has already long been forming before cars even hit the track. Between paddock whispers, the Barcelona shakedown, and both Bahrain test, all of those suggested that Mercedes might have the strongest package heading into 2026. And after an 8/10 gap in qualifying to the nearest non-Mercedes car and a relatively comfortable race win, Russell is firmly in the front seat for this championship, but that doesn't mean it's his to lose. Mercedes still have question marks over their development after the trials and tribulations of the ground effect era. Antonelli's full potential hasn't yet been unlocked, and Ferrari are close enough that strong starts, better strategy, and a good upgrade could firmly put them in the fight. No matter what though, Russell is ready for this. He's been waiting a very long time for an opportunity like this. He looks more consistent and more calm under pressure than ever before, two traits that are absolutely essential in a championship battle. He has a rejuvenated Mercedes team behind him, and while Antonelli could eventually become a major threat, Russell clearly has the upper hand on him for now. That said, there are still 23 races to go, but after Australia, George Russell is in the best possible position to win the 2026 World Championship. The question is whether Mercedes can keep that advantage or if Ferrari and the rest of the grid can close the gap before it's too late.